Roger Tabor is the TV naturalist, biologist and outstanding authority on the domestic cat. Roger, who conceived, researched, wrote and presented the highly successful BBC TV series Cats, is also the best-selling award-winning author of Cats, The Rise of the Cat, published by BBC Books to accompany the TV series, and The Wildlife of the Domestic Cat. He's also a regular lead columnist in Cat World, the specialist cat magazine. He's only the second person this century to discover a major cat cemetery of ancient Egyptian cat mummies. The domestic cat has been biologist Roger Tabor's main animal of study for nearly 20 years. During the 1970s, he was only one of a handful of pioneer researchers then looking at feral domestic cats. He helped establish, by his observation of London's cats, the pattern of ranges used by cats. His book, The Wildlife of the Domestic Cat, published in 1983, arose from that work and was awarded the Dutch Panorama Medal. Britain's leading cat charity, the Cats Protection League, called it the standard work on the subject, and Desmond Morris described it as one of the 2 best books ever written about cats. The book was the basis for the BBC QED programme, A Walk on the Wild Side. He first appeared on television in the early 1970s on Animal Magic with Johnny Morris, and went on to present many programmes and series on wildlife and conservation. He's past editor of Countryside magazine and has written wildlife books in the Survival series published around the world, yet cats have remained his passion. We're meeting him at his home where he lives in a Georgian watermill. His own cats, Tabitha and Leroy, enjoy the country life, particularly Leroy, who started life as a stray in London. In Understanding Your Cat, Roger shows us how the cat is a true member of the cat family, and how from the moment it's born, it's learning those things necessary for it to survive. This video is an insight into the world of the cat and will help you understand your cat better.
We live in an intensively man-managed landscape. Even conkers, which I've been picking from the tree, are introduced species. We have roads to take us instead of paths. We have buildings to live in instead of the open. But the cat family itself evolved in much more of a dense undergrowth type of situation. Not buildings, but jungle. If you think in terms of either tigers or little tabby cats, it's about moving as individuals around in a fairly stealthy way in and amongst things. So seeing our cats today move in amongst this jungle isn't so strange as to see the tigers moving in amongst the bigger trees. And as a result, they're not really social animals, because when they go hunting, they do so alone. So they're really a semi-social animal. Dogs, on the other hand, are much more hierarchical. They evolved in an open plains-type landscape, so their relationship with each other is one of top and second and third and so on. And you sort that out well ahead of any hunt by aggression. So it's a hierarchical landscape for the dog and not very much so for the cat. We fit into the dog's landscape oh so easily because we are at the top of the pecking order if we've got any sense. Whereas with cats, that's not really what happens. With cats, you have a totally different type of way of life. Because they lived in that woodland landscape, the semi-social way of life is much more important. As a semi-social animal, hierarchy is really irrelevant. You're not going to get one cat saying to another cat, I'm the boss, and you're really second or third or fourth or fifth. You don't get that sort of hierarchy. Toms may have an area, queens may have an area, and so on. But life is much more about after the hunt, when they're being social. They hunt alone, so their social life is when other things are there. Not about the currency of food and catching food, but about the currency of survival that follows that. So it's about when you come together to mate, it's about when you're bringing up kittens, it's about making a landscape safe so you can rear others. And for that, hierarchy, which is based on aggression, is merely going to disperse you. What you need to have is something that bonds you positively, because the hunt is not the key thing, it's something else. It's something that enables you to come together. So if you're coming together for what I suppose in shorthand terms we could call affectionate reasons, if you suddenly start snarling at each other, the system isn't going to work so well. So in general shorthand terms, the cats have a much more gentle way of life than the dogs. Neither is better, it's just one is more appropriate for an open landscape and one is more appropriate for a closed landscape. And our landscape today is just as closed as the wooded one of the taiga. So how does the feline, semi-social way of life work? It really comes down to two things: food and range, and one dictates the other. If a cat has more and more food available, it doesn't need to go quite so far to search for it. Therefore, it doesn't need quite such a large range to go and look for that food. If you're in the islands of Scotland, then you haven't got much of a place to scavenge. You have to go over a large area, hunt for it, so you need a colossal space. If there are more cats around, it's usually as a result of more food. The packing density gets higher and higher, and you go to the other extreme in the centre of our towns, and they're really crammed in. Feral cats, stray cats, gone wild cats, that live in the centre of our towns, they still have to work for a living, because even though kind-hearted people will feed them, they still will raid into dustbins and go and scavenge and obtain food in that way. And our cats are wonderful scavengers, despite the fact they are the supreme mammalian carnivore with those beautiful fangs and those claws. They nonetheless have got this trick of scavenging, and because they can scavenge, they can get more food, and therefore they can reduce their range. But even that doesn't reduce the range as much as your cat in your back garden, because the amount of food that we make available to our cats, of course, is whenever they want it sort of thing. We're virtually putting it down their throats, and as a result, their ranges can be very small. So the densest area that you will find cats on this planet is where cats live in suburban gardens, and the density then can be very, very high indeed. And if you've got a small warren of back gardens, then the number of cats that you can get in all of those houses is colossal. The remarkable thing is that you're still getting an appearance of the wild, because we know from studies carried out on tigers and also on wild cats that you get in Scotland and across Europe, that there is a sort of magical relationship between the range of a tom and the range of a queen. The range of a tom is larger than the range of a queen. The range of a male is larger than the range of a female. And the reason seems to be social reasons. It's tied up with this social way of life. It doesn't need to eat 10 times more, which is what the ratio is, 10 to 1 or thereabouts. It doesn't need to eat 10 times more food than the female. It isn't 10 times bigger. So the reason it has 10 times more land is because the basic unit of carrying capacity of the land is dictated by that queen. Once she's fed, then there are social reasons why the tom spreads out and holds a larger area. Now, our usual idea of whether it's a tabby cat or a tiger about the male is that it's a fairly idle devil. The queen has to do all that hard work. She's rearing the young, she's supporting them. Does he go out and get the food and bring it back in? No, not when it comes to cats. So he's looking after himself, she's looking after herself. So what does he do? Well, what he does do is he spreads out and holds and maintains a larger amount of landscape. And within that, the queen or the female tiger has a supported area which she can look after her young. Now, the nice thing about our own domestic cat, when it reverts to the wild, is that it lives in a sort of landscape where the queens can actually clump their ranges together. Because we have the sort of landscape that we do, with food dolloped here or food dolloped there, a group of dustbins that feral cats can go along and scavenge at to get their food resource, then it's possible for the queens to build a landscape around it. They can have their ranges clumping over it. So the toms as well, they will clump in, they will sort of just range further. So you begin to get this dartboard arrangement with a group of queens all overlapping, and you get social advantages from that. You can even get one queen acting as an auntie to another one's youngsters, and yet the toms ranging much bigger and buffering it as a sort of safety zone against other groups, against other queens and toms from distant areas. So that's fine for the ferals, but what does that mean for your landscape with your own cat in a suburban garden? If that's how your cat lives a life, then it's fine for the queens, because they see you as members of your group, And so they will clump around you, so your back garden is fine for your queen. But what if you own a tom? Well, the toms will look around and they will see the range that the queens do use in the landscape that you have, and whatever the local queen's size of range is in the gardens, then the toms will roughly be about 10 times larger, unless it's a neuter tom, then it'll only be about 7 times larger, but it will certainly be larger. And that would take in a number of other queens, and which the toms will want to think of as theirs. But the queens are thinking of you as theirs. So the toms are looking for a group to take in those queens. Your queens are looking for you as your group, and basically this nice neat pattern that the feral groups have is suddenly breaking up. There's a bit of confusion. The queens have no problem, but the poor old tomcats in a suburban landscape, they're looking around and fine, they've got their own owners as a group, but otherwise it's a bit of a confusing place. Why are these queens not liking them as much as they should? Poor old toms. The key to the understanding of your cat, here you go, is to realize that primarily it's a woodland hunter. The cat family as a whole are a hunting family, and so their design and their build is of a hunter. But a cat, like our domestic cat, being a small felid, has great grace and ability to be able not just to run around inside an apple tree, but of course also to move in the different felids in different parts of the world up and down trees as they're hunting. One of the key things about the cat as it does move through this is that tail. It's a wonderful thing for balance. We tend to see the tail working best. Have you seen footage on television of a cheetah running after prey and then it suddenly changes direction? And if you can visualize it, you'll see the tail going rather like a gyroscope. And a tail like that is a great thing for turning against. It actually is a gyroscopic organ against which you can move. Now scale that whole thing down into an animal walking in a tree like your own cat, and you have the same thing. As it moves around in the branches, slightly losing its balance, not perhaps hunting with the speed of a cheetah, but as it loses a balance one way or loses a balance the other, the tail starts turning in that gyroscopic way and it manages to keep its balance. It's exactly the same as when it walks along the top of your garden wall. The tail is a very helpful balancing act. And also walking on the top of a wall or on branches like this, the cat has another asset, and that's the ability to walk in a line. The inline walking is easily facilitated because the chest cavity, unlike ours, which is fairly flat that way, is fairly flat that way. So instead of the shoulder blades at the back being flat there, they're on the side of the body. So when the cat is walking, the shoulder blades are going up and down. That means you can have very narrow positioning as you walk. So walking up and down here on the branches is quite easy for a cat. We also, when you look at an animal like the cat, it's worth looking slightly closer than the living animal. In here, I've got the skull of a domestic cat. And when you look at the skull, you get a lot of information which is helpful to the understanding of the animal. One of the problems for cats, if they're ever involved in something like a car accident or they fall from a high area, block of flats, trees, something like that, and they hit the ground very hard, something that happens all too readily is the front of the jaw when it hits the ground, although they might be fine in other ways, because it's only lightly glued together, if you want, will come apart. So that is a sort of design fault, if you like. But the advantage for the cat with the modification of the skull that has happened is that it has a much more powerful bite than something like a dog. You see, a dog's skull, if you look sideways on, is much longer proportionally than a cat's skull. A cat's skull has been foreshortened down. Now that means that the cat has a much stronger bite proportionally than a dog has. And you might think, my God, dogs go out, they go, surely that has to be much more aggressive. But just scale up your own domestic cat. Think of it in terms of a tiger, and think whether you'd prefer to be attacked by a tiger or a wolf or something like that. The bite of a tiger is very, very fierce, and proportionally scaled down, the bite of your cat is very, very fierce. to make the comparisons between the dog and the cat is not invidious. There are two commonest pets that we have around in a familiar way in a setting like this. And one comes from that pack background, and the other one is a lone hunter. And as a lone hunter, it is responsible for its own survival. And so when it brings down prey, it has to be able to immobilize that prey totally. So these teeth at the front are the teeth of the killing bite. We call them, strangely, canine teeth. But of course in the cat, they're much longer and much more powerful than in the dog. So they pinion the prey. But when it comes to actually eating the prey, when you look inside here, now, for example, looking round the apple tree, I can very easily grab hold of an apple, and I can chew onto that if I wish. And at the back of my mouth, I can chew round and round and round, because I've got molars and premolars, flat teeth. And in a similar way, any animal that is going to have a fair amount of vegetation in their diet has flat teeth in the back. Think of a sheep. They're always going sideways like that. A dog has much flatter teeth at the back, but the cat has to be able to shear through its meat. These teeth at the back are not grinding teeth at all. These are the shearing teeth of an animal that needs a pair of scissors, basically, just to cut up its meat at the back. So if ever there was a hunter's mouth, this is the hunter's mouth. And those large eyes that fit into the socket, they're also part of the whole hunter's package. Fine, you've got the reflecting mirror at night to go around, but other things that are helpful at this time of day as well. Because it has such a big eye socket which enables so much light to go in, that's fine for nighttime hunting, but during the day it could be dazzled only too easily. So what it is able to do, have you ever thought why your cat goes to a slit and not to a circle? Well, that's exactly what does happen. To cut down on the light, if you just go to a circle, you can only reduce it by a certain amount. But if you can go to a slit, you have much more fine control over the amount of light you're letting in. It's not really to make it a wonderful daytime animal, it's just to facilitate at nighttime opening up that lens so much it can let in a lot of light. So just about every feature of the cat is something which is giving it an alertness and a vitality for taking on the world as a loner. But it has a wonderful last little trick. Within that eye, if you ever creep up on your cat and it's partly sound asleep, it seems to be sound asleep, and then you have a shock. What's happened to the cat's eyes? They're just white all over it. Where is its eye gone? It's because it has a third eyelid. We have two, but it has the third eyelid which comes across from the side, the nictitating membrane. That sometimes comes across when your cat is feeling slightly ill. But its main reason for coming across is so as the cat, which needs to have such a lot of sleep, can go onto autopilot. It can sort of doze off in those 18 hours of sleep a day, but being an alert hunter, it is never really fully deep and under when it wants to be slightly alert. And the slightest shadow across this half-shutter membrane, and bang, it's alert and it's ready for the world.
Your active hunting cat, of course, isn't always hunting. And moving around, how can you read its intentions, what it's meaning to do, what it's up to? Well, obviously, I think it's quite easy to read what Leroy's up to at the moment. So you can almost see the Zs coming out of his head, the snoring away. But when you look at something like a tail, if he's agitated, it can be flicking. Quite different to when he's moving it around to try and keep his balance. If he's very frightened and trying to see another cat off at the same time, the tail can enlarge, puffed up with anxiety and fear, and not only will that happen, but instead of just walking towards the other cat, he will go sideways on. So the whole width of his body can be making him look as big as is possible, and that will, along the spine, the hair will also come up. So very quickly the cat can look about twice the size he normally is, particularly when his legs go very stiff as well. People very often get confused between the face postures as well of a cat, whether it's in a defensive mode or an attacking mode. Now, of course, to other cats there's very little ambiguity because they are only too well aware of what happens at the ears. Now, you pop your ears round, Leroy. There we are. When you look at a cat's head, if it's relaxed, then you've got a position very much like Leroy at the moment. But when it goes into a frightened, defensive mood, cornered, and it has to be on its sort of last legs to see something off, then the ears virtually disappear from sight. They go absolutely flat down, and the cat will be cornered. If, on the other hand, you're dealing with an animal which superficially to a human could look exactly the same, going through the caterwauling or type of noises, the difference from a cat's point of view when it's reading it is that the ears are round like that. So you've got the cat, you can actually see the back of those ears from the front. So there's an attack mode where the ears swivel, but you can see the back of them from the front, or the defense mode when they're totally flat down. And of course, when you're in a defense mode, do be careful. Don't handle a cat like that, because you could come off worse. Caterwauling, though, the sounds that we hear in the outside world, people often think of as mating, and of course it happens during mating times. But usually, it's not the mating that's causing that, because you have the sort of romantic little chirps and flourishes going on between toms and queens. What is going on when you hear that caterwauling is the accumulation of males to an area attracted by that queen on heat as she goes through her rolling and her estrus tumbles and moving around, and the scent wafts out over the neighbourhood. But toms are coming in from different areas, crossing different territories, and so of course you are getting some fighting going on between those toms. And the fighting of the tom can be quite dramatic as they rake with their back legs and roll and tumble. But the tumbling of the estrus queen when she's anticipating mating is quite different, rolling over on her shoulders, and what she's saying is, oh, I'm quite keen to mate. But of course she isn't that keen actually at first, and the males are much more keen, so they will be coming up only too keen, wanting to mate. And if there's only one queen and one tom there, then initially the tom is very, very alert. Many hours on into the night, over which we'll draw a discreet veil, the exact reverse happens, because after many times of mating, what happens is the queen gets progressively more keen, and the poor old tom is saying, thank you very much. No more, that's fine. Thank you very much. And of course, sometime later, you get into the situation where the youngsters are born.
It's impossible not to fall in love with little kittens. Everybody who ever goes to a cattery just loses part of their soul. You look into these little eyes and you just begin to melt. There's no two ways about it. Even if you didn't want a cat, you will take a cat home with you, and perhaps you may take two cats home, so you have to steel yourself. One of the reasons for that is the flatness of a kitten's face is very similar to a child's face, and so with those big eyes, which are disproportionately large at this stage in the kitten's face, we just sort of go, ooh. But when they're born, life actually is the beginning of a big adventure. And what's happening is that they're launched into the world, and mum initially has to look after them totally. They're totally dependent on their mother for everything. She's feeding them, and from that milk they have to get, for the first few weeks, all the nourishment they can. They have to have that important bit of colostrum in the first instance, but after that they're getting their normal rich mother's milk. And when they're first born, she will lick away the membranes, and she will sever the cord herself that separates them from her, where they've been looked after inside her for that length of time. And once that severance is done, they're suddenly new independent kittens. Very, very rarely that occasionally goes wrong, and a mother cat will accidentally eat a kitten, but it's very, very unusual. Normally it's such a matter-of-fact event that you can take kitten birth almost totally for granted. Yes, you feel taken for granted? No, you're not really, are you? When they're at this age, they're beginning to already feel slightly larger, but of course, at the beginning, they have to sort out where the food comes from. And although this little kitten already has its eyes fully open and it's squeaking at the world, when they start off, the eyes are tight shut. So they're not getting any information from that at all. And what they get their information really from, not even hearing. Hearing, they've got some sound sense, but it's not until about day 5 that it begins to make any real impact. What they have to rely on is a sense of smell. And from that sense of smell, they can navigate their way to the mother's teat, because that's where the milk's going to come from. And also from that warmth. Mum helps. She nuzzles them along. She acts in a very kindly way. She lays open, exposing her tummy, coveting them around in that sort of way, and with her head she just moves them in towards the teats. And very soon, in kittens, unlike in dogs really don't mind which particular teat they're going for, but kittens, they'd soon develop an early preference for a teat and stick with that. And the reason is quite simple. Even at this sort of young age, they have razor-sharp claws, and Mum would not want them fighting all over the teats. So what's happened is that there just has, within the sort of cat family, developed this ability to select out. And mums ever since have been grateful for that happening. So what's the age of this one, and how can you tell what happens with your kittens? There is a very definite kitten timetable in terms of development. When you look at a little kitten like this one, it clearly isn't sort of just born and a week old or anything silly like that. And it's no longer involved with mum with these long 8-hour suckles, because when they start off, once they get on the teat, they just seem to stay there indefinitely. They will squeak away like this, even at their youngest age, and let mum know that they want food, or if they get out into the cold, that they require food. When a kitten gets to about this stage of 3 weeks old, mew, 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 it's beginning to explore the world. And as it potters around, and it can only just potter around, it's not really into serious walking as yet. It's discovering walking. As it potters around, the paws are going down in a sort of fairly shaky way. It's beginning to sort of feel its way round.